Someone besides Corey. Come on, Landon.
Watching a group, like one or more groups of animals without having to control.
Right. So it's basically you're watching something, you're observing what's happening, but you're not actually interfering, or there's nothing you're actually comparing it to. So there's no control group. All right. So that's what differs between observational studies and experiments. Observational studies, you're just looking at a scenario and seeing what's happening, but there's no actual interference on your part. All right. So that leads into experiment, and I basically kind of described it. But what is an experiment? What makes an experiment, Corey?
It's testing like air group that is controlled driven to other behavior testing.
Right. So experiments are basically where you have two different groups, typically the control group and the experimental group, where typically the control group is the one that doesn't get what we're testing, whereas the experimental group does get what we're testing, and then you compare the two, see what changes happened. All right, so like I said yesterday, a lot of it is, you see experiments a lot in medical research, where typically the control group will get what we call the placebo, or the sugar pill, however you want to put it, and the experimental group will get the actual drug. And they'll see, like, okay, what's going on here? Does it actually do what I want it to do? All right. Now, today, we're kind of continuing on from what we talked about yesterday, but we're talking specifically about sampling. So we talked about different studies. Now we're looking at how you would actually pick a sample for the studies. And there's a bunch of different types of samples. So if I were you guys, I would go grab a highlighter if you don't have one, because there's not really a lot of writing for this. So grab a highlighter, because there's going to be a lot of highlighting, just not a lot of writing.
Yeah, this is orange. I said orange. I have orange too. Yeah, maybe.
So they're in the bucket on the shelf. You need one. All right, so with the sampling techniques, all right, this is typically how people choose their samples whenever they're doing any type of study, whether it be a survey, observational study, or an experiment. And based off of those examples, based off of that sample, can determine first off how biased your study is, or kind of does it actually represent what you're looking at? Because remember, samples are a piece of the population. Because to actually sample an entire population is near to impossible. All right. The closest thing to a full population survey is the census, and even then, there's still people that are unaccounted for. All right. So, with the sampling techniques, the very first one that we have is convenience. All right. So, it is a sample taken that is easily available. So, it's easily available or convenient. Son of a biscuit. All right. So it's easily available or convenient. All right. And an example would be you ask the first 10 people who walk through the door, or you just ask your neighbors. Yeah. So it's basically what's convenient for you. So an example of this in our scenario would be, let's say I was taking a survey on how you wanted class to run today. But I only asked the first 4 people that walked into this class. So that would typically be Gavin, Corey, Kylie, and Luna, because those are usually the first 4 people that I see in the day. All right. So they would end up deciding what we do as a class that day. All right. Whereas the rest of y'all would not have a voice, because I just did what was the easiest for me, which was ask the first people that I saw. All right. So that, or I just, let's say I was going around asking teachers what grade level is their favorite to teach. But I only went down the math hallway. All right, because that's the hallway I'm on. That was convenient for me, but it's not necessarily a good representation of the entirety of West Carteret teachers. All right, so that would be convenience. Now, here's my question to you guys: would that be a biased survey, or a biased study, or a unbiased study? Oh, it's definitely biased. So this definitely is a biased study or a biased sample, because it can basically say, okay, since it was so convenient for us, it can swing in a certain direction. Basically, it's response bias. All right, meaning that basically who responded, that skews your results. So, for example, if I went and asked the math teachers which grade level they like to teach, it'll probably be whatever classes they see the most of, which for a lot of math teachers, it's typically, sophomores and juniors a lot of times. Yes, there's freshmen too, but more mixed. All right. So it would definitely be biased as opposed to other teachers who see all the grade levels. All right. Now, that's convenience. Then there's voluntary response. And that's a sample that comes from a group of people who choose to participate and are not randomly selected. So, for example, that's like an online survey, surveys left out on the table in a workplace, mail-in surveys in a magazine or newspaper. So, for example, you guys ever gone to the grocery store and you buy something and the cashier lady circles like the survey that they're like, hey, you should fill this out on our performance or whatever, and you don't actually do it? That would be a voluntary response type survey. Another one would be like, if you go to, I'm trying to think of a place that does it a lot. Dairy Queen, yeah. So if you go to Dairy Queen, you buy food, they give you the receipt. They're like, hey, fill this out. Tell us how we did. How many of you guys actually do that?
I had to say
exactly. So, yeah. Like that's another example of voluntary response. It's people that actually choose to do it. Or another example would be if the school sends you a Google form survey and they're like, fill this out at your convenience, and you just don't do it. Voluntary response. All right. So based off of that, would this be a biased or unbiased sample? It's definitely biased. All right. That's another form of response bias where basically whoever decides to actually do it versus when you actually randomly select. Because if you randomly select the people, you would actually get a good variation of answers. But, the people that actually volunteer to do it are typically the overachievers and the people that have nothing else better to do. All right. So those scores could shift depending on what kind of person they are. All right. So that is a biased sample. All right. Now we're getting into the samples that most studies use. All right. So the first sample that a lot of studies use, and this is probably the one that you hear about the most, is the simple random sample, which we also say SRS. All right. So with SRS, it's basically saying that each item has the same probability of being selected through a random process, like drawing a name out of a hat, drawing a card out of a deck, or using a random number generator. So, for example, take class, for example. I have my popsicle sticks. All right. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 people here. So you got a 1 out of 11 chance of getting called on to answer a question. All right. And I pull a stick out, and it's, of course, it's someone that's not in here, but it's Tomas. All right. So then the probability, that's kind of, you all had an equal chance of getting picked. There's no, I can't see the names. I have no clue. There's no like little dots or anything that tells me, oh, this is this person's stick. All right, it's completely random. All right. A lot of times in studies, they use random number generators where they would say, okay, these numbers, they assign each participant a number, and they're like, okay, these numbers, we'll use number 12, 56, 35, and 6. All right. So that would also be kind of using a simple random sample, using a number generator to pick your people. Or, just a deck of cards. So, guys, I've used before in this class where I made you guys draw a card and that decided your groups. All right. You had, the same probability of picking any of the cards, but that also assigned your group. It was completely random. All right. I had no effect. I had no clue which cards you were going to pick. And that's how that works. All right. So, do you think that a simple random sample would be biased or unbiased? Yeah, it's pretty unbiased. Since it is random, there's really not a lot of room for bias in it unless the study itself is biased. So the sample is unbiased, but the study itself could be biased with the way it's made, pretty much. But the way they did the sample, that would definitely be an unbiased sample. Then we have a systematic sample. So that's when we put items are put in order. So they put items in order. The first one is selected at random, and then the nth item is selected. So, for example, you roll a dice to choose the first one, then select every fifth item after that. All right. So, for example, you guys all have class numbers. All right. So let's say that I said, okay, the person with numbers whose class number is 3, that's my first one. And then I'm going to say every second number after 3 is going to be part of my sample. So that would be 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. All right, that's who would be picked in the class. All right. So that would also be a systematic sample. I'm saying that every nth item is selected. Another example would be, let's say we were taking a school-wide survey. All right. And you were interviewing students as they were walking into the door. All right. Let's say that you said, okay, I'm going to pick every 10th student that walks in the door. So you pick number 1, and then every 10th student after that walks in, that's who you pick to ask. All right. That's systematic. You basically pick a number of how many you're going to count after, and you stick with it. Does that make sense? So do you think that would be biased or unbiased? Yeah, it's pretty unbiased. So even though we pick a number, it's still random. All right. Because we don't know who's going to walk through that door next. All right. I don't particularly know your numbers off the top of my head in the class. Actually, I do, but it still would not be biased because I'm not saying, okay, I know if I pick this, this, and this, these people will go. No, it's okay, I rolled a die. It told me 3, so every third person after this number is what I pick. All right. So it's pretty unbiased. Then we have these next two are very similar, but there's very minute differences, so pay attention. So the next sample is a stratified sample, and all it is a population is separated into groups or strata. It's usually based on the measurement like age, income, etc. And a random sample is taken from each group. If the groups are not the same size, the samples are proportional. All right. So the best example I can think of is just the way high school's laid out. 4 grade levels. All right. A stratified sample would be if I took a sample from all 4 grade levels. All right. So let's say I was doing a survey about Chromebook usage or whatever. All right. I would pick a random sample of the 9th graders, the 10th graders, the 11th graders, and the 12th graders. And based off of how big those class sizes are, I would say, okay, let's say I pick 25% of the population to get sampled. So, for example, that's a fourth of them. So, for example, say the freshmen only had 200 people in their class, whereas the seniors had, I don't know, 300. So that means if I only want 25%, I would do 50 from the freshman class, but 75 from the um, senior class. All right. As long as it's a proportional sample from all the groups, it still works as a stratified sample. But you're basically taking random samples within established groups. Another way would be, say, you know those surveys where they ask you your age, like if you're within this age range? That could also be a stratified sample because they're saying, okay, we're looking specifically at, like, think TV ratings. Like, if you ever heard about how they figure out whether TV shows or shows on Netflix or whatever are liked, they look at, okay, what's the demographic that we're looking at? Okay, we're targeting people between the ages of 18 and 25. All right. How are like the likability in this range? Now let's look at, say, from 30 to 45. What's the difference? Those are stratified samples. All right. So do you think that'll be biased or unbiased? Sure. So this one's also unbiased. So even though you're picking from different groups, as long as all of those groups are represented in a proportional way, it is unbiased. So for example, again, going back to the high school one, as long as I take the exact same proportion of samples from each grade level, it's unbiased. As long as it's still randomly selected, which it typically is. All right, and the last one is the cluster sample. So that's when a population is separated into groups called clusters, usually based on location, and one or more cluster is chosen to participate. So either a random sample or all the members of each cluster are included. So the best way I could describe this is y'all's Chrome rooms, all right? So for Chrome rooms, they're all separated by grade level. So you would have seniors only in one Chrome room, freshmen only in another Chrome room. Let's say I wanted to do a sample where I want to look specifically at with, let's say I'm doing a sample just across the school again with Chromebook usage. All right. I would say, okay, let me just randomly select 7 Chrome rooms in the school to interview. All right. Those Chrome rooms are the clusters, and the ones that we randomly selected are the samples that we got from the clusters. All right. So it's not so much based off of the grade level, it's based off of where they're at. So if you were in, say, my Chrome room, you may have gotten interviewed, but say if you were in, say, Miss Sherman's Chrome room and you didn't get selected, you would not get interviewed. But we could both have the exact same grade levels in here. All right. Does that make sense? All right. So do you guys think this would be biased or unbiased? Yeah, it's pretty unbiased. So even though it may not be as separated nicely as stratified, like into the different demographics, it's still pretty random because you don't exactly know who's going to be in what group. All right. It just depends on how you group them. And a lot of times, another example would just be you guys know how school districts work? Like, for example, what makes you guys come here instead of east? So basically, there's invisible lines within the county that say, okay, if you live from here to here, you go to West Carteret. If you live from here to here, you go to East. If you live from here to here, you go to Croatan. All right. Those could also be considered clusters. All right. The West Carteret district, the East Carteret district, and the Croatan district. So let's say that you were doing a survey across all the high schools population, like between parents out of all of the Carteret County districts, and they randomly selected West Carteret and Croatan. All right, those would be the clusters that they pick. So any parent that lives within the Croatan district, any parent that lives within the West Carteret district. That's another way to think about it. All right. Okay, so now that we know what we know, let's see if you guys can identify. So what we're going to do now, this is where your whiteboard comes in, is I'm going to give you guys an example, and you're going to say whether it is convenience, voluntary, SRS, systematic, cluster, or stratified. All right? Yeah. Yeah. So what you're going to do is I'm going to tell you the sample, the example. I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to kind of think about it, write it down on your whiteboard, and then when I say raise them, you're going to raise them. All right? And we'll see kind of what the consensus is. All right, so if you don't have a whiteboard, take a minute, grab it now. All right, so I'm going to project the example on the board, and then we are going to identify what you think it is. So again, I will read it to you guys and project on the board at the same time. You're going to write down what type of sample you think it is, and then when I say raise your board, you raise them. So you still may want that journal entry out just so you can reference it. All right. So let's just start out with letter A. So, to determine what activities students at your school prefer, you put each student's name in a big bowl, draw 100 names, and ask those students to respond to a survey about what activities they prefer. What type of sample is this? So, take a minute, think about it.
Wait, are we just doing it like the name?
You're just naming what it is. So, is it simple random sample? Is it stratified? Is it a cluster? Is it convenience? Voluntary? What do you think it is? So what type of sample did they just take? So determine what activities. To determine what activities students at your school prefer, you put each student's name in a big bowl, draw 100 names, and ask those students to respond to a survey about what they prefer. So write it down. All right, you're going to raise in 3, 2, 1. Raise them. All right, good job. It is SRS. So simple random sample. So can someone raise your hand and tell me why it's simple random sample? Luna. Right, they're just randomly drawing names out of a bowl. All right, so it's completely random. There's like no special grouping. There's no counting involved. They're just like, okay, we're just gonna stick my hand in. I'm just gonna pull out names 100 times until I have my sample. All right. All right, let's look at the next one. So, to determine what activities students at your school prefer, you assign each student a number. You randomly select a starting number among the first 10 numbers, then survey that student, every 10th student from that point on. What type of sample is that? So think about it. Write your answer down. All right. You're going to raise in 3, 2, 1. All right, good job. It is a systematic sample. Can someone raise their hand and tell me why it's systematic? What makes it systematic? Corey.
It's usually starting every certain amount.
Right. So they picked the starting number, and then they did every 10 student after that number. So that is definitely systematic. All right. Let's do this one. So to determine what activities students at your school prefer, you randomly select 5 homeroom classes and survey each student in those classes. What type of sample? What type of sample is that? So you randomly select 5 homeroom classes and survey each student in those classes. What type of sample is that? All right, write your answer down. I'm gonna raise in 3, 2, 1. Great, good job. Most of you guys did get cluster sample. So, can someone raise their hand who hasn't talked yet and tell me why it's cluster? What makes it cluster? Someone besides Corey. Corey's carrying y'all today. Come on. What specifically makes it cluster? What clued you in that it was cluster? Landon.
Randomly select 5 homeroom classes.
Right. So they just selected 5 homeroom classes. The homerooms would be considered the cluster. There wasn't a demographic that they picked specifically. So like they didn't say, oh, I picked 9th grade homeroom classes. I picked 10th grade homeroom classes. No, they just picked random homeroom classes. All right. So there wasn't a demographic that defined them. They just picked this many groups, which would be your clusters. All right. So, to determine what percent of residents in a city have experienced a robbery in the past year, you assign each resident a number and use a computer to randomly choose 100 numbers. You look up police reports for each resident selected. What type of sample is that? All right, make sure your answer is written down. We will raise in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we're a little disjointed a bit. So if you picked SRS, you are correct. All right. So simple random sample. Why is it? So the two that I saw between was simple random and systematic. Why is it simple random and not systematic, Corey? Right. So I feel like what tripped y'all up is that they randomly assigned a number to residents and then they picked 100. So remember, systematic means that you are picking every 10th, every 100th person of the numbers that you assign. Whereas random sample means that after they assigned everyone a number, they just like basically put it in a hat or told the computer, okay, pick 100 numbers out of this list. And those are the numbers I'm going to interview. So it's definitely a simple random sample. All right. To determine the average number of hours high school seniors in NC spend playing video games, you randomly select 20 high schools in NC and ask all of the seniors at each high school about their video game habits. What type of sample is this? So this one's a little tricky, so think about it. All right, make sure it's written down. We're going to raise in 3, 2, 1. Ooh, split again. All right, so I would have guessed y'all will pick between cluster and stratified. The correct answer is cluster. All right, so if you got cluster, you are correct. All right, now here's why it's cluster. So you randomly select 20 high schools in NC. That's where it's cluster. All right, there's no determination the um, of the demographic. Now, where I can see where y'all got mixed up was they asked all the seniors in each high school about their video game habits. The fact that they mentioned seniors, I think that's where y'all were thinking stratified because it's demographic. However, if you think about it, with the clusters, since they're only picking 20 high schools in North Carolina, they may have just said, okay, we're only going to talk to seniors because that's the only ones that we care about. All right. It's not so much I'm randomly selecting this many seniors from each high school. It's I'm taking 20 high schools out of North Carolina. Because if you think about it, there's a lot more schools than 20 high schools in North Carolina. There's a couple hundred actually. So that's why it would definitely be clusters because the high schools themselves are the clusters. All right. Let's try. So the next one, to find out why people choose a particular brand of mineral water, a company attaches a mail-in response card to the neck of every water bottle sold. What type of sample is that? All right, write it down. We're going to raise in 3, 2, 1. All right, so if you picked voluntary, you are correct. Why is it voluntary? Mail in. All right, so basically, it's if you decide to actually fill out that survey that's attached to the water bottle and physically go buy a stamp, put it in an envelope, stick that sucker on, and take it to the post office, it's voluntary. It's do you actually care enough to do that? All right. So that is definitely voluntary. All right, let's do like 2 or 3 more and then we'll call it a day. All right. To conduct a satisfaction survey on recent car purchases, an analyst samples a list of 10,000 new car buyers, which is divided into 4 groups of 2,500 for 4 different models. The analyst randomly chooses 100 buyers of each model. What type of sample is that? So again, this one's also a little bit tricky, so think carefully. All right, write it down because we're going to raise in 3, 2, 1. Oh, good job. Most of y'all got it. So it was stratified. All right. So if you pick cluster, you were close. Those would be the two that I expected you to pick between. All right. What makes it stratified and not cluster is the fact that they are selecting between 4 different models of cars. So, for example, let's say that we're talking about, say, a Ford dealership. And they look at, okay, who's buying F-150s, who's buying Escapes, who's buying Explorers, and who's buying what? Expeditions, yeah. All right. And they're just looking at it that way. But what also clues you in is the fact that they're taking a proportion of each. All right, because it's probably not the same number of people that buy F-150s versus Escapes. All right, checks aren't for everybody. All right, so they then take the 100 buyers of each model, and they already separated the groups into 2,500. All right, so they make sure that there was 2,500 people of each group. All right, let's do one more, then we're going to be done. Which one do I want? All right, let's do this one. So, to find out why people choose a particular brand of mineral water, a company representative asks the first 20 people seen carrying mineral water to the park on a summer day. What type of sample is that? All right, write it down. We're going to raise in 3, 2, 1. Good job, guys. It is convenient. So, what makes it convenient is that they ask the first 20 people that they see, all right, carrying that water. So it's not really like they just randomly pick them out of a hat or they are like, hey, would you like to take a survey? No, they just go up. They're like those weird people in the street. They'll go like, hey, what do you think about this? You know, like those people like during protests or like, have any of y'all in here voted before? I know some of you are engaged. Okay, so Corey may know about this, but whenever you go voting, there's always the different parties sitting outside the voting reciprocal, waiting to bombard you with, "Hey, what do you think about voting this way versus this way?" It's always like,
Are you saying voting or voting?
voting with a V.
No, it sounds like you're saying both of them at the same time.
Voting. All right. So basically, like if you go vote anywhere, there was always like people from either party sitting outside because they're not allowed to actually go in to where you vote, but they were sitting outside trying to say, "Hey, who are you voting for? Hey, who are you voting for?" And I'm like, none of your business. Good day to you, sir. Goodbye. All right. So,
My birthday was election day last year. I did not vote.
Did you vote this year?
all right. So,
Did I vote this year?
Her birthday hasn't even passed.
First of all, election day happens every 4 years.
all right. So, good job, guys. So, being able to, this will be a lot of times what they would ask you on the EOC in terms of stats is what type of samples going on. So, knowing these types of samples is good. All right. All right, so for the rest of class, here's what we're going to do. So you guys can put away the whiteboards and markers and erasers, and then listen. Listen. All right. Then there's another quizzes. So you should most likely get EOC review number 2 done and quizzes. Again, if you have questions about any of this stuff in the review, please come ask me because that's the best time to kind of nick some stuff in the bud if you don't remember things and to help you recap on it. All right. So you guys got a solid 40 minutes until class ends. So get to work.
It sounds like you're saying vote.
Voting with a
Listen. She said voting, and then right after that she said, "Have you tried voting?"
I did not say voting. I said voting. The
I walked in the class, and the first thing I heard was, "Have you ever been voting?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, but." Okay, I'm putting this one.
Yep.
Also, if you want to, which test are you looking for? I still got it. If it's one of the previous ones, I still got it. You did.
Yeah.
So you want to try it? Just because it's great.
You should quote.
Yeah. If it's anything from like 6 to 8, I was too late.
Voting goes first.
6 to 8.
Yeah. People are gonna hate it when I write books all day, and I'm like,
Yeah, but let's see how we can pay.
yeah, now.
We're gonna change it.
Yeah, well, I've been inside for the past 5 hours.
Your shoes.
I thought they were kind of getting
I'm not saying this for.
Wait,
Oh, by the way, guys, your test grades are in.
That's right.
That's not good.
And I did throw you guys a bone. I did curve the Unit 8 test because the raw scores were. I had a tear in my eye seeing these raw scores.
Wow, let's not do this.
I want to see what I got. Oh yeah, guys, if you want to take your 5-minute break, just be back here by 12:30.
You brought me that.
I got it. I'm writing. I'm writing low.
I need more tape. We're in out.
Gang, we don't need this back yet. What is with this
I'll be back
double
at
switch
close.
change?
Is the wall.
What? You're sitting down talking to me. You're unhappy and you're mad. You fucking mad units.
You grabbed that
so fast.
sir.
All right, let's take our 5-minute break. We need to time that.
Can you just do test corrections? Just do test corrections. Most people will not do often.
I would definitely do that.
Wait, where they going?
Let's see where I'm at now.
Sunday every day. Ain't doing that.
I mean,
I already know I'm cooking the exam.
I'll be fine. Blue is the raw, pink is
Yeah, no, okay.
Taylor, this is yours. Blue is the raw, pink is
I'm cooked. I thought I had them so good. I think we're done for this. Miss Murphy,
I don't want that.
Miss Murphy, I'll see you next year. issues, Ruby.
Then I will.
Actually, if you don't pass this class, you will be. This class, this already happened.
Oh god.
Why are we being so aggressive?
Got that.
I always do that. Why is it stop right now?
This was
Then say that. Don't just get mad.
okay. Blue is
That's not how you solve things. You make problems. I'm just saying.
Guys, don't forget you have another unit circle quiz today. I think today's gonna be the last one, so make sure you're studying for that too.
I'm actually I'm cooked. Why are you leaving?
Let's see.
I moved to the right now.
Yes. Just make sure you move that chair back. It's directly on me, and it's like, ugh. The reason that light switch has to be on is because the middle thing would blare out the projector. Landon, I wouldn't use that desk. It's gross. You'll be fine. You could try it, but don't sit back too far. Because just grab it and pull it back a little bit. See what happens.
I don't know. When I don't pass, we'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a yeah. You may die if you sit in that one.
Excuse me?
What?
Talking about that desk in the corner, its chair is completely unhinged from the. So if you lean back the tiniest bit, you're going to go blip.
Oh, no, it's so hot. Guys, I'm not really worried about my. Guess what? We have no one today.